This is very exciting. Hi, I'm Dale Peterson, and welcome to the Unsolicited Response Show. Joining me on the show this week is Don Weber. He is a principal consultant and founder with Cutaway Security, which I like to call a boutique ICS security consulting firm, but I also looked at your site. You do more than ICS. I guess ICS is one of the specialty areas you cover. Prior to that, you actually started your career 8 years with the Marine Corps. So thank you for your service. And you're a SANS certified instructor. So welcome to the show, Don.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, sir.
And just because I don't know, what courses are you teaching with SANS?
So I concentrate on the ICS 410 class, which is the ICS SCADA Security Essentials is what the name is. I also teach a hosted class, and that's how I got my start. Was Justin Searle has the hosted class, the Assessing and Exploiting Control Systems. SANS taught it on the hosted classes aren't approved for, they're not associated with certifications, and they don't usually teach them at every event, but they do teach this one at selected events, like some of the ICS summits and maybe some of the larger events that Justin has agreements with. So I started teaching that. So I teach them both. The assessing and exploiting is a little bit more technical, just because that's the nature of it. The ICS 410 is that security essentials. It's bringing the OT and the IT and InfoSec side together, discussing all the concepts. So I teach both of those. Currently, we're working on the security assessment and penetration testing class, which has been designated as the ICS 613. We're hoping to get that in alpha by December or January, start doing alpha and beta testing for the next year.
Okay, well, that's great. And I should also mention you're active and support the ICS Village as well. So you give back to the community that way as well.
Yes, sir.
But the reason I have you on the show is you actually submitted something to me, I think, for S4. It didn't make the S4, but I thought it was an interesting topic that we should have on the show. And that's, I got to read this here. It is the IACS System Testing and Assessment Rating STAR Methodology, or IACS STAR. And I think we'll just, for shortness, we'll just call it STAR for this show. It's another risk assessment methodology. And I guess the first question to ask is, why do we need another one? There's so many out there, both formal public ones, and I know every consulting practice has their own risk methodology. Why do we need another one?
Well, it's actually why I changed the name. So the original name was the risk assessment methodology, and that's what I submitted to you. And but I was talking with Tim Conway. Tim Conway, he names things way better than I do. And when I talked to him about that, because I'm trying to come up with this for partially for the class, but more for the community. And this isn't an assessment methodology. This is a way to score the risk. And I modified. So I learned when at the beginning of this year, I went through the 62443 certification process, and I did all of the certification courses that they provided. I got the expert certificate, and one of the reasons why I was doing that is, I know how to do security assessments. I know how to do a risk assessment program. I understand it. I know how I feed into it, but I was hoping to get out of that a scoring methodology. In other words, how do I look at the vulnerabilities that I'm finding from an implementation standpoint, not from a security research standpoint? Like, I point over here because that's where my lab is. So finding vulnerabilities in products, they get a CVSS score. Okay. But when I find implementation vulnerabilities, I've got to think about all of the other different factors of where that vulnerability is being implemented. What are the factors around the threat actors, the exploitability of it, considering all of the countermeasures, as 62443 calls it, all of the countermeasures that are in place, all of the hard work that the teams have already done. how do I rate the risk appropriately for control environments? And so this isn't, well, the reason why we took methodology out of the title is, yes, this is really just going to be for scoring risk, taking into consideration the removing that business aspect while there is still cost associated with some of these things, we're more worried about some of the technical factors, the impact factors, impacts and consequences of a realized exploited vulnerability. And so there was no way, nobody was doing this. Nobody had, nobody explained it and was talking about it outside of some of the simple methodologies that are being put out associated with the risk assessment process. So this is my way of giving back into the community to start that discussion around how do we rate implementation risk without using some of the methodologies that are coming from the corporate side. So a long answer, Dale, I understand, but hopefully that answers your question.
Well, I would say that the decision trees like ICS Patch were trying to do the same sort of thing. So I think there are some other ones out there, but I will admit that none have taken hold. None have really captured the imagination of the ICS community and been widely used. But let's maybe dive into this. Liz, can you bring up the slides for me? So you're very straightforward, and I got to put on my glasses for this, but you're very straightforward, and we're showing on the screen now for the listeners the OWASP Risk Rating Methodology. And Don, you say flat out that you're kind of taking this and converting it to something that could be used in the ICS world. So if we look, if I just kind of go forward here, this is what the STAR methodology looks. And you see it looks almost exactly the same, with some difference in the categories and the individual items, but the approach and the format was the same. So going back to the OWASP, what was it about the OWASP risk rating methodology that you liked, that you said, this is close to what we need, it just needs to be modified?
Yes, this whole thing started because I was working with two different utilities, and their teams were asking me to rate the vulnerabilities I was finding within their environments differently.
Mm-hmm.
One team wanted to use the NIST 830, and all of the tables that are outlined at the end of that. That's the methodology we use for that scoring. When I read through those categories, that they're really talking about, is this going to be realized? They're using the actual terms. Is this going to be realized in a year, in 2 years, in 5 years, and so forth? And while that's helpful from a risk standpoint, from a vulnerability standpoint, it wasn't very helpful. But the other utility, so that was one utility. The other utility was actually asking me to use this risk rating calculator. And I think the background from that is the background that we're trying to, the audience we're trying to educate, and to try to change that thought process from the corporate environment, from their from the way that they're rating vulnerabilities when they identify them in web applications, mobile apps, architectural implementations from the corporate side. We want those people educated in the considerations that we would find and that are that help us understand the realization of vulnerabilities within the control environments. So I wanted to take something that people are probably familiar with, that they learned on, for rating risk and rating vulnerabilities in the on the corporate side, and give them something familiar when they're going into these new organizations and helping them understand the vulnerabilities within that implementation.
Well, and I'm going to switch over to yours now, to the STAR. And for those of you watching, you can see this. For those of you listening, it is a set of likelihood and it's off my screen. What's the second one?
The consequence factors.
Likely. So there's two likelihood elements and two consequence elements. The likelihoods are threat actor vectors, vulnerability threat actor factors, vulnerability factors, and the consequence are technical impact factors and safety impact factors.
Yes, sir.
And then underneath each of those are 4 different elements. So we'll get into these a little bit that you rate from 0 to 9. So there's 16 different elements that you rate 0 to 9. They all, as far as I could tell, they all are equally weighted in the calculation. And you end up with a number between 0 and 9 for your answer. So it is a quantitative measure. And I wanted to first, before we get into how it's actually the components of it, one of the challenges I have with these quantitative measures is, and I've talked to Richard Seierson about this and others. You know, Richard wrote the book, How to Quantify or How to Measure Anything in Cybersecurity Risk, is that they imply some level of rigor that it is a quantitative risk analysis, but really it's a series of qualitative risk analysis by SMEs put into numbers and turned into a number. So how do you look at this? Is this a quantitative measurement or is it a qualitative measurement?
Well, I typically think of quantitative being associated with a dollar value, and the qualitative having a score. I mean, we've got to find a way. So this scoring, each one of the factors, and there's, as you mentioned, there are different things that help us understand the score of each factor. We have to have the way the human mind works is we have a scoring factor. Now, we could go with high, medium, and low, but I just chose, I mean, so the OWASP methodology used a number, and I liked the reason why I maintained that is I like the granularity around it. There was, and I know you're going to go over this a little bit later, but every one of the, when you're selecting the different categories for each one of the factors, there is a description of what 9 would be, what 8 would be, 7, and so forth. Not for every one. We skipped a few, and I don't want to say it's arbitrary, but I just kind of felt like one was, as I was going through, I didn't need to be as granular. Really, I just needed people to get the point when we're talking about a certain concept, whether it's skill level, whether it's ease of exploitation, loss of availability. I just wanted a description that would help people wrap their heads around all of the, some of the factors, not all, excuse me, some of the factors that go into understanding that category. And in the case of this, when I started looking at it, I was like, okay, what are the factors that help to that make a situation more risky and less risky? And I modified the verbiage around that to help people not only from the that are coming from the information security side and the corporate side, but also so that I could drive that understanding from the OT administrators and the stakeholders from the control side, so that they would be okay with the selection and could provide more tangible arguments around actually rating that category so that it was appropriate for that finding. Did I answer your question, Dale?
Yeah, and what we see, I put up as an example. If you're looking, this is one of the measurements, and it shows text that helps you decide what it is between a 0 and a 9, but it doesn't have entries for all values. There's not an entry for 2, 4, or 7, but you could select two if you thought it was somewhere between the 3 description and the 1 description. And again, this is an early draft. This could change, right?
So first of all, I mean, let me pull on that thread a little bit, Dale. First of all, you're absolutely right. Just because there's not an entry for 2 or 4, it doesn't mean that you can't select it. These are all just ways to help us understand and explain and have the conversation. This is really facilitating that conversation. I know people want the easy button. We're just going to go through and quickly select things, but we have to, and when we're talking about risk associated with consequence, like vulnerabilities and their realization and what's going to actually happen in our control network, then we have to have a conversation around these things to so that we can help prioritize things, understand those impacts and those consequences a little bit better, so we can make better decisions and quicker decisions. I'm very tactical in my implementation, and so
Okay,
yes,
well,
you can
let's,
select
yeah.
whichever one you don't want from these. You can modify these. I was actually there's a discussion thread in the GitHub right now where somebody was Christopher was talking about how he would like to actually flip around one of the skill levels, and because he feels that people, script kiddies and people with lack of knowledge around technologies are more dangerous within these environments. And I understand his thought process, but he could actually go through and just, when he's implementing this, he could just flip that over. Now, he would have to write it down, make a note in his documentation that he's doing it. These are just recommendations to help wrap your head around the scoring.
Okay. Just one other comment for me. I won't want to ask for a response, but one of the other reasons why these numbers sometimes make me nervous is sometimes people believe there's more precision in the numbers than there really is. So if one thing is a 7.2 and the other is a 6.8, they probably are the same. And that's just, again, that's just more of a learning the tool sort of thing. But let's get into this a little bit.
So, I mean, and I'm sorry, Dale. So would you feel that having a high, medium, low would be more applicable and for these, for rating these?
It's a challenge I haven't really figured out an answer for. My biggest issue is if you're going to use numbers, I think you have to be clear on the precision. So you have to say that anything, it's plus or minus 2 or something like that. Kind of like they do with the polling. When two candidates are, one's 48 and one's 49, and they take a poll and they say our poll is plus or minus 2, it says, okay, they really are pretty much the same. And I think you kind of run into this with these sorts of things.
When you go down, are you adding? So obviously this technique that I've described, and we've got 16 different inputs to help us understand likelihood and consequence. Isn't that complex enough rather than being drilling down and making it more granular? Because my concern around that is that
I'm not saying
Don, for this. Yes,
Don, I'm not saying make it more granular.
Okay.
I'm saying that at the end, when you get the score, that you note that, hey, this score could be off. If it's a 6.8, it could actually be a 4.8 to an 8.8. Because, and this is one of the reasons why I do like decision trees, is at the end we're trying to drive an action. Right? Yes. Is this something I need to address now? Is this something I need to address at the next maintenance window? Is this something I can forget about completely? Is this something hair's on fire, shut all access to the system down? You're trying to drive an action. And so the difference between a 7.2 and a 6.8 probably isn't really a big deal. But for some people, they might say, "Oh, this means I definitely should do this one before that one." Well, but let's move on, because I think more.
It can be a big deal when the vendors are responsible for addressing highs and mediums, but not lows, and so it can be a good deal in service level agreements and the approach when things are going from testing and production. So, my final comment.
But if you were going to do that, then you would say, whatever your precision level is, you'd probably err on the high side, right? You'd say my precision level is plus or minus, let's say 1. And if it's a 6, then I'm going to treat it as a high, because it might be a high even though it's a 6.
Right. But and that's where the discussion. Yeah, that's where the discussion comes in, because this is always just to facilitate the discussion. Thank you.
Right. So let's jump into the differences. What are the major differences? Why not just use the OWASP? What did you change that you think was most important in this methodology?
Well, I did go through, the comments about each one of the different levels when you're thinking about skill level, or you're thinking about the safety impact factors. I did go through. We modified them. First of all, we modified the inputs, the different categories, to include safety and some technical factors that are appropriate to control environments. I added things that are considerations, associated with access. Remote access is a good example. I'm trying to find the one off the top of my head. When I go look at the loss of accountability, and I start thinking about the centralized logging, multi-factor authentication, cameras, and other physical controls that are in place. I updated each one of those selections to include things that are more appropriate within the control environment, that their inclusion would reduce the risk, especially around physical security. If you've got a vulnerability or a situation but nobody can access it remotely, they have to physically get there. That is a consideration. That should be reducing the risk calculation, unless threat actors have actual physical access into that, and then you might bump it up a little bit. So I've modified that verbiage so that it's easier to have that conversation, considering the things we know are implemented within control environments.
Yeah, and I thought, for example, under the threat factors, I thought opportunity was great, because it really talked about how accessible the system was, both how accessible it was from the outside and also how secured it was, which, were a couple of the branches on my tree. But one thing I noticed was motive was kind of a repeat of opportunity. And to a certain degree, size was a repeat of opportunity, less directly than motive, but it was almost like you were triple scoring. Now, in a sense, I agree with that, because that's the most important factor. But it seemed like I was being asked the same question 3 times.
You were not. That was my fault. That was my mistake. And actually, as I was preparing for this, reminding myself of all of these things, the gentleman that I mentioned earlier, Christopher, he had actually, notified me in an issue on GitHub that, hey, you copied the same things in there. And so when you read through the methodology, it was I had them different. But I just copy and pasted the wrong thing into the wrong place for the scoring calculator, and that's been fixed. That's been updated. So the motive is different. The motive descriptions are different than the opportunity descriptions.
Okay, makes sense. And then I thought, if I was going to point, and it's up on the screen now for people watching, the thing that I thought was the biggest change were the safety impact factors. So, and those are broken down to environmental damage, process damage, safety equipment, and recoverability. And none of that is in, I don't think any of that, maybe recoverability, but most of that is not in the original OWASP. And you can see those are all directly applicable. The one that didn't make sense to me there was safety equipment, because that seemed to deal more with the likelihood of something happening. Because again, it was almost like opportunity again. It was a sense of, if someone is on my control system, will the safety system work? If someone is here, will the safety system work? If someone is here, will the safety system work? I think it's an important factor, but I wasn't sure it belonged there. But that safety impact factors, I think, is a huge selling point of this methodology.
And that's what I was shooting for. I mean, the comments that I get, or the comments that I've been hearing throughout the industry, is people complaining about that, and which is what drove me to do this. Is that there was a lot of complaints that the way we were rating vulnerabilities and risk didn't take that into consideration, and I had no way. I was like, okay, great. Tell me how to break this down so I can score it correctly. When I talk about the safety equipment and and I've got the breakdowns there, that's just me trying to, come up with a good, plausible way because I do believe that our active and our passive safety protections that are in our in our process do play a factor in reducing a certain amount of risk associated with the vulnerability. Whether
no
or not
doubt.
I portrayed it well in that description, I'm not sure. That's why I'm hoping that the community will come and say, hey, great start, but here's better verbiage.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a question of, so if you were going to put safety equipment there, I think it would affect the consequence. You're right. But then if you talk about the accessibility of the safety equipment, you're really talking about the likelihood that that'll still be working as opposed to whether it exists. But it's kind of a nit. It needs to be in there somewhere. I thought that was really good. Another thing that was very interesting to me is if you look at under the technical impact factors, which were very similar to what was in OWASP, and you have your old CIA there: loss of confidentiality, loss of integrity, loss of availability. But I noticed you didn't try to play the AIC game. They are all weighted the same. So loss of confidentiality is rated, it impacts the score as much as loss of availability. Have you gotten comments on that, or why did you select that?
So I get comments on it all the time. I'm a CIA fan, and the reason why I'm a CIA fan is that I don't believe that confidentiality, integrity, or availability should be considered in a specific order. They should be all taken into consideration. They all play a role. We have to have the conversation. Now, we might quickly, not rate it as impactful, but certainly that's as long as we talk about it. So I'm not a fan of changing it up. CIA has always just been a mnemonic so people can remember those three things. CIA is really, and I teach this in the class, CIA is easy for everybody around the world to remember, right? And we have to talk about all three. And we can't just, the problem with rearranging it in my mind is that once people that are familiar with control environments, once they talk about availability and integrity, which is the way they usually rate it, they're like, okay, we're good. That's good enough. And no, it's not good enough, because there are plenty of ways we do need to maintain control of our environments, and the confidentiality of the information is important, needs to be talked about. So that's why I don't like to change it up, but I'm always willing to talk about it.
Well, and the other thing is, much like you could customize the descriptions for each rating from 0 to 9, how easy it is if someone said, well, personally, I want confidentiality to have full weight. I want integrity to have 80%, and I want I want availability full weight, integrity 80%, confidentiality 10%. Can they go in and change the tool to do that?
I mean, the code's out there. We can certainly do any math we wanted to, and if it works out, it's better for their calculations. Yeah, absolutely. As long as everybody in the conversation is in agreement that that's how you want to weight things, I think that's important. We have to take into consideration all of the stakeholders, and yeah, the math can be there. Actually, one of the things I'm considering is, every industry, there's so many industrial sectors. You probably know this better than I do. It might be that down the line we have different one of these calculators for different industries. Not necessarily changing up, all of the categories and stuff like that, but changing up how we word things specific to that industry, but maybe also some of the math that's involved on the back end. I just kept the math that they had, that, and like you said, it's all scored equally. If we want to change it, I'm open to having that conversation, or even creating specific calculators that do that, so people can select the best method for their organization.
Well, I'd almost wonder if the, and giving you more work to do, you and the team, but I'd almost want to see some sort of easy template where I could change the scores, like an input file that it would call, and then I could change the scores, because I almost agree with your approach of not trying to change the scores, because they could vary so much by sector. For example, you might even have someone who wants to change a title, wants to change it from accountability to regulatory, because they're in a regulated industry, and that's their bigger concern. And they might want to change the values to be much higher because of the potential fines and such. But I understand why, if this is just a generic one, you keep it as generic as possible. But the ability to customize it would make it, I think, much more appealing to people.
And I mean, so if I had to do a roadmap, and that's actually high on the list of doing it, creating like a YAML file or JSON file that's easily modified so that to feed into this. So it's a little bit easier. That takes a little bit more development from a calculator standpoint. But I don't want to, I don't want to waste my time and effort on a project that nobody's using and nobody sees value in. If you go out to my repos, I've got all kinds of things that I think are useful to me in my implementations, but I don't get a lot of community feedback on. So the more community feedback I get on this, the more buy-in, the more discussions, and people let me know that it's useful, the more effort I will be able to put into this and potentially bring in people that can help make some of those modifications.
You kind of hit the next direction I wanted to go in with the questioning to finish off the show here. Because as I mentioned, I did my ICS patch decision tree based off some of the Art Mannion and CertCC work, and I think it's the best way to determine how to handle vulnerabilities. But it's gone nowhere. It's just, and to a certain extent, I haven't really pushed it that hard. I put it out there, but I haven't gone around the speaking tour saying this is how we should do it. And even worse, CISA kind of took up this decision tree approach with what they call the SSVC, and their decision tree, in my opinion, is terrible for ICS. So it almost is worse than having nothing. So I understand this issue of how much time do I put in something? What level of passion do I have to making it work? I guess one of the questions I would have is, has OWASP expressed any interest in having an IACS version of their calculator?
Well, I did reach out. I mean, the reason why I very specifically put the OWASP stuff on there is I don't want anybody feeling that I stole it and I'm trying to make money off of their hard effort. I reached out to them. I got no response. That is a similar experience to other people that have reached out to the originators of that calculator and that methodology. And look, it's the same problem. Is they put it out there and then they went off on another project. But I didn't want that to hold me back. And so if somebody eventually sends me a cease and desist, I'll figure out another way to get the calculator, modify the back end of the calculator up there. But at the same time, no, nobody's come to me or contacted me from OWASP about this effort. And it might be just that they haven't seen it and the emails are going to DevNull. So,
okay. And then if OWASP doesn't play ball, you're on this show obviously talking about it, but how are you going to drive use of this? Is this something that you or the team are committed to driving the use of this, or is this put it out there? If it gets some traction, then we'll do more?
And so I'm not very good at marketing. I put it out there. I'm really good at speaking to the security community. So I've we know plenty of the same people, but most of my the people that I understand or that I communicate with on a day-to-day basis are from the information security side. I'm going to get this information out there. Talking with you, trying to submit this to talk at different conferences where I can. But I'm also going to integrate this into the SAN 613 class as a part of helping people understand you don't use the same vulnerability rating calculators as you do from the corporate environment. So I think it's important. And it wasn't my initial drive for this, but I just realized, this fits perfectly into my class development. So we'll be putting it out there. I'm going to offer this up to any of my clients that want, I'm going to say, hey, I've got this scoring system. Do you want me to use yours? Which is typically what I do because they have their own scoring system. Or do you want or would you like to use this new one and provide inputs and modifying it as we go forward? So word is, I'm just going to get the word out, word of mouth through the community as normal. Hopefully it gains traction. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, it was funny you mentioned some people have their own, because one of the lines I pulled out of your, I think it was your README document on GitHub, it says it is not designed to replace a mature organization's risk rating methodology.
Yes, sir.
So you envision that that would be the case where people have looked at all these things and have customized it and created their own way of dealing risk. And you say, this is not for you. This is for the people that are struggling to find a way.
And it might be for the other ones, because everything we just mentioned might be how they're doing it. So it really depends on the organizations, and how they've done it. But I don't want to say, I don't want to claim that I'm not coming up with something new. I'm just coming up with a new way to discuss it, to enable new discussions within their own organization.
No, and I definitely appreciate that, because, kind of Digital Bonds history was taking things that worked in other areas and saying, how can I modify this to work in ICS, whether it be audit files for scanners or IDS signatures for control system protocols. There's a lot of things that maybe we can't take over 100% into the ICS world, but we can take the approach and maybe 70% and then customize it, and it can be highly valuable without reinventing the wheel. So I do really appreciate it when anyone comes out and puts a new idea out there. So any criticism I have of it in this show,
Yes,
I appreciate the effort. And like I say, there hasn't been a methodology that's really stuck. There isn't one that you can say, this is what everyone's using. So this could be it. I would say, from my point of view, the real attractive parts of this is it gets people a number, which, despite my worries, people seem to want. And it's simple, which is also something that's kind of a criteria for success. So we'll have to see how it goes. As we close out the show here, Don, is there anything else you want to say about the project or this resulting product that's come out of it?
I mean, it basically just re-emphasizing what I just said, is that, this is just a starting point, and I'm hoping to get feedback from the community of everybody that I've talked to, JD Christopher, and other people that we understand that work with this. They're helping to provide that input, but I'm looking for support from the implementers, especially from the OT side. I want to make sure that this is actionable to them, and applicable within their environments. It helps them understand things a little bit better. But I need that input. I need that information to drive this forward and improve it. So I would say, just give me some feedback. That's all I need. Just review and feedback, even if it's a quick, yes, this works, no, this doesn't work. That's what I'm hoping for.
And where should people, if they want to see this product, this risk rating, this STAR system, where should they go to see it, and where should they go to contact you if they want to ask you questions or get involved?
So LinkedIn, it's I'm easily findable on LinkedIn. Just LinkedIn and Cutaway. Direct messaging me or commenting on one of the posts eventually that will come out about this. This is hosted on a GitHub repository, so the Cutaway Security GitHub repository, pretty easy to find. You can just Google GitHub and IACS STAR, and this should pop up. Should be one of the ones that are listed. Hopefully it'll get a little bit higher in there. The actual calculator, so IACS star-calculator.com. And I also think, I'm pretty sure I did the IACS-star.com as well. That'll actually take you to the calculator, which will take you to a description of how everything was selected for the back end. And so you can use the calculator, but also read about the methodology that we came up with to justify, everything that's documented there. So those are the three places, Dale.
Okay. And we'll include those links in the show notes, so people can just click on them directly. My guest this week has been Don Weber of Cutaway Security, and the creator of, let me get this right, the IACS System Testing and Assessment Rating Methodology, IACS STAR. Thanks for being on the show, Don.
I really appreciate it, sir. Thank you for all your work.